Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And I'm going to go directly into the screen share. And let's see what I got here. And we are, of course, reading. We're reading now a mitzvah, right? The mitzvah of Pesach, of celebrating the festival of Pesach, and how it was to be done according to the Bible, if the temple were still in existence. Although at this particular point in Egypt, we're talking about the Pesach in Egypt. But there are many mitzvot, many commandments that are involved here, and so Rashi reflects this approach to analyzing the text at this point. And we've already had a little bit of a taste of this in our last lesson, but it continues because, again, God is giving Moses all these commandments involved in the practice of the Pesach, how it was celebrated in Egypt. And of course, in this particular case, it was to make sure that they were not struck by the angel of death. The firstborn were not going to be struck. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. So it does occur to me that if, in fact, one of the greatest things that we can accomplish in our lives is to develop a heart that is full of gratitude, that is full of appreciation, that certainly performing mitzvot is a way of showing appreciation to God in a very profound kind of way. So, but let me continue. So, we just talked about the actual Paschal lamb above in the previous verses, and how it could only be eaten roasted, could not be boiled, couldn't be eaten not fully cooked, etc., and how it was to be prepared. We read about that too, and we're going to go on now. So, let me make sure. Yes. Okay. I want to make this is where we left off. V'kacha tochlu oto, and you should eat it in this way. Motnechem chagurim, in a sense, with your loins girded. And Rashi will explain what is the implication of that expression. Na'alechem beraglechem, your shoes on your feet, umakelchem be'etchem, and your staffs in your hands. V'achaltem oto, and you should eat it, this Pesach lamb, bechipazon, in a hurried way. Pesachu Lashem. It is a Pesach offering to God. So it's not just a fact that hopefully lamb is something you enjoy eating. You're doing this as an act, as a formal act before God, in response to a commandment. So, Motnechem chagurim, your loins girded, with a belt, in other words. The point is, mezumanim laderech, prepared to go on the way. In other words, prepared to leave. Interesting. That's something I think to meditate a little bit about, was the significance that this was to be in a sense, right, a Last Supper, because they were going to go on to a different place. And this whole image of this being a final meal and a preparation for a very new kind of existence. And I suspect, I wonder to myself in some ways why that is also a custom that I've heard of giving someone who's condemned to a capital punishment is given a last meal. That there's something very significant about the fact that we're engaged in eating, that the whole idea and the symbolism of having a meal. So, going on, just some things to think about. Bechipazon, Lashon Behala. This has the connotation of hurriedness, umehirut, right? This again, it's speed. Kamo, and he gives an example from the first book of Samuel 23, chapter 23. V'haya David nechpaz. There's the chipazon. You see the root there. Then David made haste lalechet, to go. And this is Kings, the second book of Kings, chapter 7. Asher hishlichu aram Bechofzam, I would think is the way it's said. But again, you see the root here of chafaz, meaning in its hurriness, and this has to do with the time when the Arameans were attacking, and something happened, and they just simply left their camp intact. And this is, they cast things off so that they could leave more quickly and they wouldn't be encumbered. So the idea of being able to leave in a hurry. Pesach hu Hashem, so it is a Pesach for God. HaKorban, this offering, hu karui Pesach, it is called a Pesach. Al Shem, and the name it gets is Al Shem Hadilug, on the skipping, V'hapesicha, and the stepping over. Shehakadosh Baruch Hu, because in this case, of course, the Holy One, blessed be He, Medaleg, He would be skipping, He would be jumping over Batei Yisrael, He would be jumping over the homes of the Israelites, Mibein Batei Mitzrayim, from amongst the homes of the Egyptians, of Batei, Mitzrayim is what it would be, the homes of Egypt. The Kofetz Mimitzri, and in fact he would skip from an Egyptian, the Mitzri, to another Egyptian, Yisrael Emtsai, and there would be an Israelite Emtsai in the middle, Nimlat, who would escape. Va'atem, and as for you, Asu kal avodatav, l'shem shamayim. He's making a point here. Rashi's making a point that isn't the reason you should be doing this. In other words, you shouldn't be doing it so you'll escape, this slaughter of the firstborn. You should be doing it for the sake of God, simply because God has commanded you to do it. That's l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. And then he's got davar acher, another interpretation, derech dilug ukvitza. Okay, so in other words, it's a way of again, jumping and skipping, zecher lishmo, right? That is a remembrance of the name of this offering, shekarui Pesach. In other words, that there's a reference to the skipping in the name of the offering itself. The gam paskua, right? There's apparently but we have pascha, something like that. Lashon psia, it has the meaning of stepping over. Excuse me. Va'avarti ba'eretz Mitzrayim ba'layla hazeh. I will pass over, right? I will pass by the land of Egypt on this night. Vehiketi, and I will smite kol bechor, every firstborn. Be'eretz Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt, me Adam, from humans, va'ad behema, to cattle, uvachol Elohei Mitzrayim, and with all the gods of Egypt, e'esesh fatim, I will deliver judgments. Ani Hashem, I am the Lord. So there's quite a bit to unpack here. This very last phrase saying, I am the Lord, what exactly is it? What is it trying to denote? So let's go back into the Rashi and take a look. So, for avarti, and I shall pass by. Kemelech, like a king, ha'over mimakom lemakom, who passes from one place to another, who moves from one place to another place, uvaha'avara achat, and in one motion, so to speak, right, in one act of passing by, uverega achat, and in one moment, kulan lokin, all of them will be smitten. They'll all be stricken. That's from the Mechilta. We've mentioned that before. This halachic midrash. Kol bechor be'eretz Mitzrayim, every firstborn in the land of Egypt. Af bechorot acherim, in other words, it's any firstborn in the land of Egypt, in other words, other firstborns as well, Vehem Mitzrayim, who happen to be in Egypt. In other words, even if they're not Egyptian, but they're from another nation, another tribe that are in the land of Egypt. Uminayin, and what about Af Bechorei Mitzrayim? How about firstborn of Egyptians, Shebemokot Mot Acherim, who happen to be outside the land of Egypt, who happen to be in other places? Talmud Lomar. From this we have, in other words, that they also would be stricken in this particular way. Talmud Lomar, we have a verse in Psalm 136, the Makeh Mitzrayim Bevichorehem, who slew Egypt in their firstborn. In other words, that as long as they were Egyptians, their firstborn would be stricken. Me'adam v'ad behema, from man to beast. Mi shehitchil ba'avera, in other words, why this particular order? The one who began with the transgression, tchila, let me read this again. Mi shehitchil ba'avera tchila, one who started the transgression, mimenu matchelet hapuraniot, from him will begin the retribution. Uvechol Elohei Mitzrayim, and now what about all the gods of Egypt? So if the god of Egypt shall eat, if the god was made out of wood, near kevet, it would rot. V'shel matechet, and if it was made out of metal, nameset, it melts, v'nitachat la'aretz, and would just pour out onto the ground. So, Eseh Shvatim Ani Hashem, I will wreak judgments, I the Lord, Ani Ba'atzmi. So this I the Lord is Ani Ba'atzmi, I alone, V'lo al yedei shaliach, and not by means of a messenger. So again, just in terms of understanding this verse, it's one thing, and Rashi has attempted to help us quite deeply. There certainly are questions that might arise from this verse, but I think essentially what it's trying to let us know is how seriously this, first of all, the behavior has to do in the eyes of a divine power, and that this is such a strong and fundamental idea that behind everything in this world there is a divine power. As far as the slaying of the firstborn, etc. Yes, David, go ahead. I don't mind. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. Did you get to the I am the Lord your God part?
Yes.
Was that the end with? Pardon me.
Yes, that's the part where Rashi said, "I alone, without any assistance, without a messenger."
Okay. Got it. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, missed that.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's okay. It's quite okay. So I was trying to explain what justification, right? In case we sort of feel, well, what business is this happening? I think it has to do with a very, very deep understanding that our very existence is so contingent on the existence of this transcendent one, of our transcendent creator. And understanding that in the sight of God, we would be nothing, absolutely nothing, less than nothing. And that since the life we have ultimately comes from God, that it is a gift, a loan, whatever, but it is totally contingent on the divine, that if our divine Lord wishes to remove it from us, he has every right to do it. There's no question, because it isn't our own. And I think that's a really interesting and profound level of understanding, because I really think people believe that we own our own bodies. I mean, you see it stated explicitly, and yet, truthfully, that is more of an emotional statement than a rational statement, because when you own something, you have to have some basis of ownership. You either created it or you manufactured it in a way, but the right of possession is a very interesting concept. And in what sense did we create ourselves? And even if you say that your parents, and I think in some cultures to this day, there's a strong belief over the concept of the degree to which your parents own you, and the fact that we don't own our own bodies, which means that we are responsible. It's like if you're renting a home, you don't own the home, and that gives you certain limitations as to what you're entitled to do with that home. You're not allowed to just destroy it. You're not allowed to redecorate it without the permission of the owner, right? There are conditions involved when you don't own something. And even if you do own something, there are actually responsibilities now that come along with ownership. And somehow, again, it's this notion of license that we feel we can do whatever we like. If we have the power to do it, that power of some kind is all that counts. So if you have the money to do it, you can do it. If you have the physical power and the wherewithal to do it, you can do it. And you can see how, if you understand what is in some ways below the lines here that we're reading, we don't. We don't own these things. But again, if you rent something, you don't own it, and you have responsibilities regarding that property of which you are renting. And likewise, with our bodies, we don't own them, we don't have license to do whatever we want with them. But we do have a responsibility to maintain them and to honor whatever rules are set. If you rent something, you have to follow the conditions of the rental. And in a sense, the Torah is trying to help us understand the conditions of our lives, because we do not own our lives, not even from a permanency kind of point of view, because we don't live forever. And I think there's a subtlety and a sophistication of a point of view that looks at things as deeply as this and understands but the ethical and other consequences of seeing life in this particular way. And it's so countercultural, at least in our present Western culture, no doubt about it. And in some ways, this gets to perhaps the heart of what's wrong with what's going on in the world right now. And frankly, I think that some of the very negative things that appear to be happening now are a result of this kind of thinking. It starts off with a false premise that we own our bodies. We don't. And that might makes right. So this is some of the stuff that's going on here in the very birth of the Jewish people. Yeah, David.
Yeah, okay. So that I'm sure this could be a long discussion, probably already has been, but so then I guess my question is, and I understand everything you're saying and I agree with it, but then how come this is not part of the Ten Commandments, in the sense that you're talking about ownership, right? And if you extend the concept of what you just said, that we have no ownership, right? That ownership to some extent is a societal construct, right? But again, the Ten Commandments were used, to form the basis of society. So how come there's not a statement around there, quote, is no ownership, because now if you take what you said, then you have all sorts of questions about how does science interact with this, right? Because if we don't own our own bodies, are we allowed to use science in order to intersect, cure disease, do all sorts of other things that are either positive or negative? I mean, you can extend it all over the place, but I guess my fundamental question is, why isn't there something about that in the commandments that says there you do not you do not own anything, et cetera, but, and then the but goes on to explain how we live with it. Anyway,
Right.
that's a question.
Okay. So when I give you the answer to this, David, people are going to think you are my shill, okay? So, it's a Jewish thing to answer a question with a question.
Yeah.
Ask you a question. How do the Ten Commandments start off? What's the
Uh,
very first statement of the Ten Commandments?
let's see. Well, it's I am the Lord your God, right? Is
Okay, let me
yeah.
help you. Okay, so I'm going to help you with it. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt.
Yep. Okay.
That is the basis of the authority. I am simply spelling out. So I have actually sort of two answers. One is that's enough to say that you owe yourself to God, right? That God has that authority over the Jewish people because he brought them out of slavery. And had God not had brought the Jewish people out of slavery, and this is mentioned in the Haggadah and elsewhere, that had God not done that, we'd still be slaves to Pharaoh in a sense,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
That's number one. Number two, God gives us the intelligence to be able to develop these ideas as I've played them out. In other words, to spell it out like that. I'm grateful for the amount of intelligence that I have, but I'm not a genius, hardly that, okay? And so it takes just a level of desire to want to understand the relationship with God, to be able to articulate the ideas that I'm articulating now. And the real point I want to make is, and in that sense, you gain some merit. In other words, God wants to give us the opportunity to gain some merit by taking the trouble of trying to spell it out, right? And that's why we have this whole idea. God, I mean, theoretically, God could put the whole Torah inside of us. We could have a brain that somehow intuited all of this kind of stuff. But the fact is, that we have to work at it, and it's that working at it and working out of it and trying to, at least in some sense, devote yourself to it, that you gain a sense of worthiness as a human being. Because when you get everything, then in a sense you're like a beggar, and you don't want to be a beggar. I mean, there's a real issue there about making sure that people who are disenfranchised and disadvantaged don't feel totally humbled, right? I mean, it's very important to have a level of humility, but on the other hand, you don't want to have a crushing level of humility where you feel like that you have no worth whatsoever. You have to have a balance. And the fact that, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, number one, the answer is there. It's right there at the very beginning of the Ten Commandments, because God is stating the authority on which God is doing this. And number two, it's okay that we can get together and talk about it. I mean, and the other thing is the pure enjoyment of having these kinds of discussions.
So, okay, two points. First, maybe what you stated about the beginning of the Ten Commandments defines authority, right? But not necessarily. There's a difference between authority and ownership, right? I can have authority over you, but you can own something, but I can still have authority over you while you own it, right? I mean, so and that's but and then maybe I'm splitting hairs. And then the second part was yeah, maybe I did not state my question. My question was the fact that ownership is a very important concept, and because from what you were describing earlier, if we don't own anything, or if God owns everything and we don't own anything, people can make the point that, hey, look, I should be entitled to your house even though you've purchased it, because there is no quote ownership. So my point was that how shouldn't that have been one of those important things to have gotten in there? That's what I was trying to ask, and maybe I didn't ask it very
Okay.
well.
No, I just didn't understand. Okay, let me see if I can sort of piece these out, because you're asking, in a way, you're making two different points. One is that perhaps having this discussion, we start to understand ownership a little bit better, and that
Yep.
authority and ownership are synonymous.
Okay.
Not only that, but that ownership, and there are two pieces to ownership. One is authority, and along with authority goes responsibility. There was an old statement that you cannot be held responsible if you didn't have the authority to begin with. So this combination of authority and responsibility both sort of go into the notion of what we are talking about when we're talking about any kind of ownership. So again, the reason why, if I can try to explain the second part of your question, the, the fact that we don't own anything means we don't have the right to really, in a sense, almost lift a finger without having been given permission to do it. All right, and I'm trying to see if I can put together some basic concepts with regarding the commandments. But the commandments, if you understand them, just naturally flow from the idea of ultimate divine ownership, and that you are responding as an individual to a divine, to the divine ownership. That God actually owns everything, and it means that you need to know what the rules are that God has given in terms of how now you handle the fact that you're living in this world with things around you over which some of which you are, as it were, renting. Right. So when you rent, you don't own. But who's this? So understanding our lives actually as a loan and not ultimate ownership. And part of that idea of ultimate ownership or ownership has to do with perpetuity. And the fact that we don't live here forever immediately throws this idea that life is a loan. LOAN.
Yep. No, no. Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. I understand that. I think I need to think about this some more. It's a intriguing. It's very intriguing. So
Yes. By
anyway,
the way, one of the Ten Commandments is thou shalt not steal. Although I will tell
right.
you that the traditional understanding of thou shalt not steal means thou shalt not kidnap. That essentially the interpretation, the basic modality behind the Ten Commandments is that they're all capital offenses.
Oh, okay.
And
All right.
kidnapping is a capital offense.
Yeah. Okay. That would also, yeah, that makes sense given the context of some of the other commandments. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Oh
I didn't
no,
mean.
thank you for asking the question. Please, David, I'm hoping that your questions are stimulating other people so that they haven't stopped listening. Okay, let me mark the space, and I love when we have these kinds of discussions. So thank you very much. Okay, let me see for some reason, things keep changing. Okay, that's good, and now I can mark the spot. And the point about this, David, that you're asking these questions is the fact is that we are actually dealing with very profound kinds of statements. Okay, let me stop the share, and we'll stop the recording for now. Okay, if I can. Okay, let's see. There we are.